Around 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, something pretty significant happened in my life. Something that turned my lack of motivation into something very impactful to me. And no, I didn't win the lottery, nor did I get scammed in the dark web. But around 2 years ago, I kind of became a teenager. And like many teenagers, I am amongst those whose sleeping schedule is pretty miserable, considering what people would advise for someone my age. And lately, my lack of sleep has become especially relevant to me, in that it started to develop into its own distinct pattern. So this school year, for instance, my sleep sort of played out like this. So in the first few weeks, I'd usually have a pretty consistent, steady sleep of around 8 hours every day. But as time went on, those 8 hours would start to shrink into 7.5 hours, which is still a fine amount of sleep. But interestingly enough, those 7.5 hours would also turn into 7 hours, which would turn into 6.5 hours, and well, you see where I'm going with this. Now, as this gradual reduction in sleeping hours kept repeating itself every single year, and as this pattern started to become so clear to me, I wanted to figure out, what the real cause for this was. So the easy answer to this might relate to procrastination, or that my computer brightness is too high, but I was looking for something in the bigger picture of all this. And after 2 sleep-deprived months, I came up with a hypothesis, which was, what if the problem with my sleep had nothing to do with speedrunning Minecraft at 11 p.m. every night? What if it had nothing to do with spending 2 hours on Reddit reading through megathreads? What if the real cause for this negative trend line was my perception of sleep? Now, for us to understand this, we have to sort of zoom in to this graph in a way. So here I am, staying up until, say, 10 p.m. And in past school years, this might have gone on for a few weeks until one night, I might have lost track of time and writing a TED Talk for the next day. And then this guy would show up. Now, sleeping later than you should for one night can't be that harmful. But the following day, I look at the clock, and it reads 10 p.m. Now, my brain's going to think, well, why should I bother following this initial goal that I had of sleeping at 10 if we had already survived an 11 p.m. sleep the previous night? And with that in mind, this initial goal that I had of sleeping at 10 would then extend itself to, say, 10:20 or 10:30. And as this cycle would keep repeating itself, my brain wouldn't be able to visualize the importance of following these goals that I would keep setting for myself, causing me to sleep later and later. So how do I deal with this? Considering that this psychological process is in fact the problem, then how do I go from rock bottom of sleeping at midnight every day all the way to a nice, steady, civil 8-hour or 7-hour long sleep? Well, the way I think about it is that there are essentially 2 paths we can take to getting there. And for us to understand these 2 paths, we have to picture ourselves on a beach. You're laying there on a nice sunny day, floating about in the water, and unbeknown to you, a current starts to slowly drift you towards the depths of the ocean. And now, since you're completely unaware that anything's even happening, you eventually come across a whirlpool. Now, before we go any further, let's shift the scenario a little. And let's look back at that whole sleep deprivation cycle and put yourselves in my shoes of what was happening. So, imagine that your hours of sleep are getting lower and lower by the week. Except that doesn't really seem to bother you, because every morning you're still able to wake up and go about your day like usual. Until one day, you wake up and realize that your night's sleep was suspiciously good. That's because you overslept and missed your school bus. Now, this would act like a shock to you, It would act like a way to wake you up and make you become more cautious of this dreadful sleeping schedule. Now, these 2 scenarios I just described are obviously, completely different, but there's an important connection between them, because it's like you're flowing along this cycle that keeps getting worse and worse, and you get out of that cycle by facing its whirlpool, by facing its final consequence. And this is one potential way of dealing with these kinds of problems, but one thing we do have to keep in mind is that this whirlpool, and a real life situation can come in different forms, and in some cases it might not be a viable option. Which is why we have this second path, which is about spotting the whirlpool before it actually overcomes you, and from there, working to swim against the current instead of flowing alongside it. Thank you.